All right, so today I want to talk about this story out of the National Post. It's titled "Alberta's Bill 10 is an affront to the rule of law," um, and basically I'll read about it and then give my thoughts on it. So they start by saying, as though following Machiavellian advice to never let a good crisis go to waste, the Alberta government has quietly expanded its own powers under the Public Health Act. Bill 10, which was rushed through the legislature in less than 48 hours, gives cabinet ministers new powers to write de facto laws and create new penalties without the approval of the Legislative Assembly. Before Bill 10 became law on April 2nd, Alberta's Public Health Act already empowered politicians and bureaucrats to take property away from citizens and organizations, um, to force citizens to render aid, to constrict people to help deal with an emergency, and to enter into any building or property without a warrant. The chief medical officer was already empowered to forcibly quarantine anyone who's ill or any person who's caring for a sick family member. Before Bill 10, cabinet ministers were already empowered to suspend the operation of provincial laws in whole or in part once cabinet declared a public health emergency, but now cabinet ministers have acquired the additional power of creating and implementing new orders and penalties simply through ministerial order without them being discussed, scrutinized, debated, or approved by the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Bill 10 has also increased the maximum penalty for disobeying the Public Health Act from 2,000 to 100,000 for the first offense and from 5,000 to 500,000 for a subsequent offense. And the problem with this kind of stuff is that how many people actually have this kind of money like now? Like I don't know how that would work. Like if they fine you $100,000 and you have $1,000 to your name, like what do they do? Again, I don't know, but anyway, the only justification provided by Health Minister Tyler Shandro for these new powers was to strengthen our ability to protect the health and safety of Albertans. Why ministers need the power to write laws on the fly was not explained. Without review or approval of the legislator, a minister can now create a new order requiring people to install tracking devices on their cell phones and requiring them to register their phones with the government. Without any oversight, a minister can create an exclusive list of people who are legally permitted to go outside, legally authorized to drive a vehicle, impose a $1,000 fine on those who walk outside or drive illegally because they are not on the list. The health minister could unilaterally declare that all sick people must be forcibly removed from their homes. As the World Health Organization has suggested, and an order could be issued for mass vaccination without this discussion or debate in the legislature. Um, Cabinet's powers to suspend laws and create new laws without input or approval from the legislator will eventually come to an end after the government decides the public health emergency has ceased. The Public Health Act refers to a 30-day period for public health emergency, but nothing in the legislation stops the cabinet from declaring another public health emergency the day after the other one expires. Practically speaking, the provincial cabinet, on the advice of the chief medical officer, could maintain a public health emergency for months or even years, with courts currently closed or highly restricted to criminal law and some family law matters. The usual checks and balances in our system of government are limited or non existent. Thankfully, the minister's new ability to write laws and create new offenses excludes power to tax and spend. Um, and newly created offenses cannot have a retroactive effect. However, Bill 10 is still an affront to the rule of law, one of Canada's foundational principles. Whereas Canada was founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, are the first words in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The rule of law means being governed by laws, not by the whims of a king or cabinet minister. Um, During this pandemic, we should accept reasonable restrictions on our charter freedoms on a temporary basis, well-defined time limits, clearly explained justifications. Yet Alberta's legislation provides no assurance that the violations of our rights will only be temporary. No specific justification for Bill 10 has been provided. Again, this is a very, very big story. Number one, the first thing I want to point out too is that this is about all the reason and justification I need to say that I would definitely no longer support this Alberta government. I was very, very reluctantly supportive of them. And the other big point I want to point out from this is that for all the people on the left, trying to, convince people of their cause and you know, show their credibility, this just goes to show that they have zero credibility and zero knowledge of the other side whatsoever. because stuff like this is a big reason to convince people not to vote for whoever's involved. The left seems to love harping on this, public health cuts and public school, cuts. And by only caring about that, what they're saying is that they really only care when it affects them by default. Again, they only care when it affects them, and you see all they ever post about. And if they actually cared about having an honest discussion, then they would talk about stuff like this. And the fact that I discovered this not from someone on the left, and I went back and looked through some of these prominent leftists that I follow, and none of them were talking about this. Again, which goes to show that they're perfectly fine with this kind of stuff because they know that when they get in power, they're going to abuse it. And that's the big problem too for anybody who supports this kind of stuff. Imagine what's going to happen when the NDP get in power. What if they just declare, yeah, we're going to implement a bunch of full on communist policies, which again, people like to scoff at that, even though it's completely BS, completely BS. They do it step by step. They'll have a 10-step, program, step 10 being full on communism. They'll start at step 1. Like you see with this whole, the people are posing, oh, well, you should only be able to, allowed out of your house, once a week or for a specific time. You should only be able to go get groceries once a week. And, once they convince people of that, okay, well, then it'll be, um, you're only allowed out of your house so often. And then it'll be, okay, well, people, it's not working. We're going to have to start tracking you. And then, oh, that's not working. We're going to have to crack down even more and more and more. And eventually you end up with communism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. And again, like I wanted to point out too, is that the fact that people on the left aren't more up in arms about this kind of stuff just goes to show that number one, they only care about themselves. They're selfish people. And again, this video is something that a right-wing government implemented, so I'm heavily critical of them. And I just got done saying that I would no longer support them because of this. So that is by no means a biased video or statement in any way, shape, or form. And like I say, it's a very sad state of affairs that we're losing a lot of freedoms because of something that there's absolutely no reason to do it. Unless, I don't think, like I say, my only justification for anything like this, even though I would still disagree with it no matter what, but I would be like, hey, whatever, is if it's literal, like Black Plague 2.0, like literally half the population's going to die if we don't do this kind of stuff. But this isn't even close to that. This isn't even close to that. This is something that we should have quarantined, anyone over 60, specifically over like 70, and people with underlying health conditions. I've seen studies that are starting to come out that show that, people under 60 with no underlying health conditions, the chances of dying if you get it is like literally 1 in 1,000. I've seen estimates as low as 1 or 2 in 1,000. 997 people out of 1,000, with no underlying health conditions will survive. And again, that's no reason to absolutely destroy an economy, to absolutely destroy any, fundamental rights and freedoms we have. Anybody saying that is insane, and they know nothing about history, because this is how this kind of stuff happens. This is how authoritarian governments spring up. And it's not that I don't think that a lot of these politicians, probably almost all of them, are naturally, authoritarian or have, bad intentions. I just think that, how the saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think humans aren't made for this kind of stuff. There needs to be checks and balances. And that's the one thing that bothers me so much about the left, is that they're always against, big massive corporate, monopolies or close to monopolies when it comes to corporations. But yet they're never skeptical of government whatsoever. And government is the biggest monopoly by far, by far. Government makes the biggest corporate monopoly in the world look like child's play. It's like Mike Tyson versus a 5-year-old. And yet they have no skepticism towards government power whatsoever. And it just goes to show that, number one, they're either completely ignorant of history and of reality and any critical thinking skills, or they agree with it, and they just are thinking, hey, once we get in power, we'll be able to use this to our advantage. And that's the problem too with these leftists. It always ends up with communism or some form of authoritarianism, because they always think that, hey, when we do it this time, it'll work. It's always this time, which is why it never works, because everybody thinks, oh, what if I had the chance to implement my form of communism or socialism, it would work out. No, we need freedom, and we need to let individuals make the decision too. And people spin that and be like, hey, well, you're suggesting the same thing. Well, no, I'm not suggesting the same thing. If I was, implementing a system, I would have no power. The most powerful person in society would have the power of like a small town mayor, literally, compared to the statist system where the prime minister and the premiers have way more power than, the CEOs of the biggest corporations. Like way more power, way more power. The CEOs of the biggest corporations don't have the power to tax and spend. They don't have the power. I mean, technically they do, but it's illegal to do it. It's legal for politicians to do pretty much anything they want. They can take money from people. They can investigate them. They can, basically investigate them till they go broke. I mean, look at some of these people in the states that, these leftists have gone after. That some of them, yeah, they committed crimes, but Hillary Clinton did something way worse than most of these people, and yet no one seems to care about that. So again, this is something that I wanted to point out because it's absolutely scary too. And the other thing too is that if you're going to do something like this, there has to be I don't know what they call it eventually, but it has there's an official term for it. But when you implement something like this, it expires on this day no matter what. And I still strongly disagree with it. But if you're going to do something like that, at least do that. This ability to rule as dictators is absolutely insane, and that's the case too. That is the case. Okay, if this kind of stuff is rammed through, we have a de facto dictatorship, monarchy, a one power state basically. And again, this is something that should be completely bipartisan. Like everybody should be able to agree on this stuff. And the fact that that isn't the case just goes to show just how bad things are in society nowadays. Because if we can't even agree on stuff that you'd think would be blatantly obvious, then we're never going to agree on anything. And that's something we have to work on. Again, which is the reason why I always suggest Wexit, that the more right-leaning free market minded people, okay, we can have our country and the lefties can have theirs. It'd be a simple solution, but again, the lefties know that if that happened, then they would have nobody to pillage and steal their money to fund their socialist utopia, and they know that the entire system would go belly up. And the more right leaning, a lot of their, I would say most of them, but a very large percentage of the right leaning people don't have the balls to do something like that, and that's basically the big divide. Um, but anyway, again, to sum it up, this is an absolutely scary as can possibly be precedent. And again, just imagine if Justin Trudeau had this power. I mean, technically he does, but imagine if they were proposing this kind of stuff. Again, people would be calling him a dictator, and rightfully so. But again, in Alberta they do that, and no one seems to care, including the left, including the left. Again, which just goes to show that the left likes this kind of stuff. The left really likes this kind of stuff. The right just doesn't like it when it's the left doing it. I guess is the big difference. Not that it is a big difference, I guess, but again, this is something that we should be up in arms about. And the fact that they passed it in less than 48 hours too, like they clearly wanted to ram it through. I mean, the fact that barely anyone heard about it, like I'm surprised I didn't hear about it because this happened in like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago almost. Um, so again, very scary precedent. Keep this in mind too. It's something that we should be very, very scared about. And again, this idea that the government can just declare something an emergency and then suspend all rights is insane. Like again, this is something that the Nazis would have dreamed of doing. Again, people like to accuse people of being Nazis and communists and all this kind of stuff up, or and but yet this is stuff that they would only dream of. Like they didn't have the power to track everything you did. I mean, technically, if you really wanted to, you could have, but everybody carries their cell phone everywhere. So if you're tracking people's cell phone, again, going people's houses without warrants, again, that is the most draconian stuff you can possibly dream up. So anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. I could go on forever about this topic, but make sure you hit that like and subscribe. I do have my PayPal and my email link in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. And check out my BitChute channel as well. Again, YouTube's going to ban or shadow ban me at some point, so check me out there.